Jasmine Mooney, the Canadian who was detained by ICE for 2 weeks, just published an essay about her experience in The Guardian, and it is harrowing. I really recommend that you go and read the whole thing yourself because she puts in perspective some horrifying things that detainees go through. See, initially she had some issues with her visa at the San Diego border, and she was assured that she, quote, didn't do anything wrong. But then she was led to a room where she was patted down and they took her shoes and removed the shoelaces. They also demanded she get rid of half of her belongings because they told her she can't take everything with her. And then she was held for 2 days in a cell where the lights were never turned off, she says, and where her cellmates and her were only given mats and aluminum sheets. She finally got her hands on her first actual blanket in 3 days when she was transferred to a real jail. There, she met more women and she heard their stories. She heard the story of a family who had work authorizations but were detained while they were waiting for their green cards. She heard from a girl who overstayed her student visa by 3 days before heading home and was detained by ICE when she returned with a valid visa. She heard from people who hadn't seen their children for weeks, who had sick parents who had been torn away from their loved ones. At 3 a.m. the next day, suddenly and with basically no information, she was transferred to another facility in Arizona, where she said it was freezing cold, they were given no pillows, she had one small blanket that wasn't warm enough, and fluorescent lights were shining on her and her fellow detainees 24/7. She had been trying to avoid eating the food she was being given because she didn't trust it, but she finally had to eat something and she said she got sick. Eventually, she was able to get in touch with her CEO and her best friend, who ultimately contacted the media because they couldn't get any answers. All the while, she continued meeting other women who were detained alongside her. Women who sobbed as they told her they were separated from their children, who showed her scars they had from enduring horrific conditions to try to get to the US and seek asylum. The women realized that Jasmine was probably going to be the first among them to get out of this facility, and they gave her letters and messages to send to their families. Jasmine wrote, quote, "It felt like we had all been kidnapped, thrown into some sort of sick psychological experiment meant to strip us of every ounce of strength and dignity." Eventually, she got a message from her best friend. Her story had blown up in the media, and almost right after, she was told she was being released. And this is where she shares one of the most harrowing messages from her story. Quote, "My ICE agent, who had never spoken to me, told my lawyer I could have left sooner if I had signed a withdrawal form, and that they hadn't known I would pay for my own flight home. From the moment I arrived, I begged every officer I saw to let me pay for my own ticket home. Not a single one of them ever spoke to me about my case. To put things in perspective, I had a Canadian passport, lawyers, resources, media attention, friends, family, and even politicians advocating for me. Yet, I was still detained for nearly 2 weeks. Imagine what this system is like for every other person in there." Jasmine also pointed out another really important part of this problem. Quote, "ICE detention isn't just a bureaucratic nightmare. It's a business. These facilities are privately owned and run for profit. These companies," she explained, "get government funding based on the number of people they detain." That is so broken. Meanwhile, people are still stuck in these facilities. A lot of people right now. People who don't have that same level of privilege that Jasmine acknowledged she had, and she was still stuck there for 2 weeks. Like, for example, Mahmoud Khalil, a green card holder who was a prominent figure in the protests at Columbia University against the genocide in Gaza, who is still detained. Like Jasmine, he has written about his experience, and he did it in the form of a letter. He wrote, quote, "My name is Mahmoud Khalil, and I am a political prisoner. I am writing to you from a detention facility in Louisiana where I wake to cold mornings and spend long days bearing witness to the quiet injustices underway against a great many people precluded from the protections of the law. Who has the right to have rights? It is certainly not the humans crowded into the cells here. It isn't the Senegalese man I met who has been deprived of his liberty for a year, his legal situation in limbo and his family an ocean away. It isn't the 21-year-old detainee I met who stepped foot in this country at age 9 only to be deported without so much as a hearing. justice escapes the contours of this nation's immigration facilities. All the while, the Trump administration is acting like these cruelties are one big joke. They edited together a compilation of people being deported to the song Closing Time, which they did without the band's permission, for the record. And the White House press secretary called the video, quote, fun, warning irregular migrants that they should self-deport if they don't want to end up in one of these fun videos. We hear about high-profile stories of people enduring this cruelty, but every single person in these institutions is a human being with rights, with loved ones. They're people who deserve to be treated with respect and to have access to due process. And if you don't agree with that, well, let's just hope that ICE doesn't make a mistake and hold you in these facilities. Because increasingly, it seems like it really could happen to anyone. What do you think of all this?